All right, so here we are talking about the pen tool vector portrait assignment. And the goal here is to take a photo and sort of use the pen tool and sort of vector building methods to make a more graphic style portrait. You can see I've done that here on this piece. If we go back to the photo reference, it's just everyone's favorite actor, Oscar Isaac. And what I went through here is just a process of doing line work, which is really the first major thing you have to do, and then going through and doing coloring as well. And then topping off with a background, because as usual, you should be doing backgrounds with your work and not leaving it blank. In the end here, we have a nice sort of framed portrait. Notice I'm using a couple things we've talked about before, some basic sort of shape building methods, as well as gradients. You'll notice that in like the face here, like there's definitely a gradient of a lighter skin tone here to a darker skin tone on the outside to give a little bit of directionality. It makes the image pop a little bit more. It makes it a little bit more realized. So do use gradients or other building methods we've used before in this portrait as well. Don't think that just because we're learning one new technique that you shouldn't be using past techniques as well. So the main tool we're going to be talking about here is the pen tool, which for some people, you've used it before. We cover it a bit in Intro Photoshop. We cover it pretty extensively in the graphic design class if you've had that. But we'll go over it here, and I'll post another sort of tutorial video about the pen tool as well to hopefully make it so it's easier for you to learn. So main things you gotta remember about the pen tool is that you have fill and stroke. So if I draw with the pen tool here, just clicking point to point, I'm not dragging, I'm just clicking and then going to the next point and clicking. And you'll see here we have a shape that is white with a black outline. I'll increase the stroke width there so that you can see it a little bit more clearly. And then the big deal with the pen tool is that if you click and drag, you get these handles. And you'll see that when I sort of drag out my pen here, we get this sort of bend, and that these handles determine the direction. You always pull in the direction you're going. So if I want to go down and to the left here, I'm going to pull my handle down a bit so that it curves with it. And it's really this sort of leading that you're doing with the handles that inform your line. Where I get a lot of people messing up is that they'll do this. They'll click and drag, and then for some reason they think that they got to click here to drag their next point. No, that point is not actually a point. It's part of your handle. The handle only tells the program how extreme your curve is going to be and what direction it's going to go. So if I click and drag a long distance, we'll get a long sort of stretched out curve on the next point. If I drag a short distance and do the same thing, you'll see that's barely bending down there in comparison to that top curve. To really get more refined looks here, ideally you want to do as little points as possible to make the most smooth looking designs. And what we're going to be doing here is sort of a strange way of using the pen tool. We're going to be using it to outline sort of the stroke itself that makes up the design rather than like filling the shape. And then we'll use the pen tool as well for shadows, which will be a little bit more similar to this. So let's go ahead and look at a photo. And just sticking with our theme here, we'll stay with Oscar Isaac. And I'm going to go ahead and start to prep this for a pen tool design, and then maybe go through and do some of the pieces of this, probably just focusing on the head here. Things such as clothing should be a little bit self-explanatory. Let's go ahead and dive in with something a little bit complicated, which would be the eye. So before we start, I'm going to select this image, and we're going to go ahead and double-click on this layer. Actually, right-click maybe. No, double-click. And do dim images and template. That's just going to fade out the image so that's a little bit more transparent. Let's go ahead and make a new layer. And I'm going to switch to the brush tool here real quick so that you can see what I'm really looking at when I'm painting here. And you could use the blob brush or brush tool here for doing a similar vector portrait. Though we're going to be focusing on the pen tool, like if you do get frustrated with the pen tool, something like blob brush can be perfectly fine as well. I'm going to set it up here though to have some pressure sensitivity to it. Because really what I'm looking at doing here is thinking what parts of this figure do I need to actually show. So like things that people miss is that you gotta get the crease in the eyebrow. And then when it comes to the eyelashes, those might be their own shape. But we're gonna get a lot of important small shapes in here. Eyelids have thickness, that's why you'll end up with a line like this right here. That might cut through. And then I still would have a line out here to show that bottom eyelid as well. So thickness here is going to play a lot in sort of getting a 3D look to this piece. You don't want to just throw basic lines. You want to build up and have some semblance of 3D-ness to your piece. And I'm just messing around with the brush tool here. As I said, I'll switch to the pen tool in a second. But you can see how even right here, I'm starting to build up an idea of like 3D-ness with it with my line work. I'm not just going for flat surfaces. If I was doing a more basic eye that someone more beginning would do, you'd probably end up with an eye like this. Which is fine, but you can see like this doesn't have like the added depth of these extra lines in there that will really make it feel like a 3D drawing. But let's do this with the pen tool and talk about why that will work a little bit better for us. So with the pen tool, I'm going to keep my fill on black, but I'm actually going to drop the opacity of this down to 50% or so that when I'm drawing, I still can see through the piece. And that will be important because it's hard to do this when that shape's getting in the way. So keep in mind that having opacity down can be really handy. Again, that template layer is blocked out, transparent, so that I can see my work pretty clearly here. So I like to start with sort of like creases in the eye because it kind of defines the eye socket. So we'll get this main crease here. And depending on the person, this crease might be pronounced. It might not be pronounced at all. It can really sort of differentiate on people. And notice I'm doing slow pulls going through. And when I get here, I want to come back around to close off this crease. So I'm going to hold Alt. And the big thing here is with Alt, you can change the direction of the handle. So this handle right now wants to pull out this way, wants to pull down to the right. You can see that because it's pointing that direction. So if I click and drag this while holding Alt, I can change the direction of that so that it points inward. And then I'll do sort of a tight line coming through into here. And when I get to here, I'll usually hold Alt when I close this so I can sort of keep that dot in place. And there we have that line right there, defining the top ridge of the eye socket. And let's go ahead and do the eyelashes and eye. And same process. I'm going here to sort of treat the eyelashes as one major shape rather than a bunch of individual shapes. I might go back and add a little bit detail later if I feel like it's necessary. And I'm really judging here, like, where am I going to end this? I feel like right here is a good place to end because it will allow me to go into the bottom part of the eyelash as well. And for this, I'm actually going to come up here and turn off smart guides, keeping this more freeform, just what I'm looking for. That was getting in the way. So it looks okay. You can always go back with the white arrow tool to fix things up. So I think I might try to get a little bit more of a curve in here. And that feels a little bit better. That's supposed to be where the eyelash gets a little bit more complicated. Again, I'll do this sort of readjustment of these points as I go along to make sure that I'm getting my lines looking clean and not too messy. And always turn off that design and give a quick check to see how your design's looking. I think this is looking okay. There's some stuff I definitely could improve, but I feel all right about it. So for a shape like the eye right here, I'll just go ahead and fill in the whole thing black. If I go back to do detail, I'll do it as just white shapes on top. And I could do that easily by going ahead, grabbing that eye, turning down the opacity, and instead of having black, we'll switch to white on my design. You can go through and add like a extra shape like that. I don't really think this one's gonna work that well. I'm definitely gonna delete it. But that way you can like break it up or build on top of it. Um, but I'm just gonna keep the eyes black for simplicity's sake here. Let's go ahead and do the eyebrows. So the eyebrows have like a sort of natural motion to them. They kind of go back like that. So when I'm drawing, I'm going to go ahead and draw with the direction of it. And any little bits of hair I'm going to have pop out are going to all kind of point in that direction so that when I add depth to the design, it all feels like it's going in that same direction. And I'm using some of like the detail of the photo underneath to, again, guide my drawing as I'm going across. Not bad. Let's go ahead and keep going here. I feel like maybe some of these points over here can come up a little bit more. If I draw a little box over them, I can actually just edge them up with the keyboard there to give them a little bit more fullness. Let's go ahead and maybe move on to the other eye. So the eyes are pretty much in place there. You can say I made some more decisions to have more eyelashes over here on this one. I definitely could do that over here on the second pass to add more shapes for have more details. Always a good idea. And this one, because of the way the eye was angled, is definitely a lot more interesting choices I had to make on that one compared to the other eye. Let's go ahead and look at the nose. When it comes to the nose, the main shape you want to look for is sort of like this nostril shape. So obviously, like I'm gonna get this shape right here. This part is separate because really what you're seeing here is that the nostril itself has like sort of like a bulge off the main part of the nose. So you want to make sure that you're getting that 3D-ness to it again. A line like this will come through. This other nostril's turned pretty far away from us, so we're barely going to see any of it. And this doesn't really actually connect right here all the way down, so I might leave a little opening there, have it pick back up, and get a form like this. Having these little gaps here on the nose, like that right there, really informs the viewer that the nose is not something that's stuck onto the face, but something that is sort of flush with the face. Something that protrudes out. It's not a sticker that's placed on top. So making sure you have these clear connections is really important, again, for getting a nose to look good. The other thing I would keep in mind here is that I might put in some supplementary lines like here and here that will help define the form of the plane of the nose that's closest to us. This far one's easy to determine because like you have that hard edge, but this part we need to make sure that it still looks like it's part of the face. So these little supplementary shapes like this can help add that into the piece. Let's go back to the pen tool and that right there is not bad for the nose. You can see again if I were to delete these two shapes, how much flatter that would seem. So those little shapes help anchor that area, and I could definitely adjust them as I need to. So I'm adding some of these other supplementary lines that I think will help define the face. A little piece like that for the eye will help define the bottom of the eye socket. Let's go ahead and do the mouth. I'm going to ignore the facial hair here for the most part, mostly because it's annoying if I were to try to get this idea of like sort of like stubble into the piece. But for the mouth, the most important line of the mouth is this part right here, where the two lips meet. That's easily the most important part. And some ways that you can get some more depth here is by looking at how there's actually like little overlaps within the lips here. So like if we're looking at the lip right here, sure, it comes through here, and you might think that I can continue all the way through, but I would actually pull it up right there so that we get this sort of turn of the lips going up. And you can follow some of the creases that are already visible on the lip to help get the idea of, again, 3D form on the design. So I might be looking at a shape like this sort of for the mouth, but again, more clean and more detailed with the pen tool. So that right there looks okay for the mouth. I could again add in some more shapes into here to make it a little bit more detailed. Again, more little lines on the lips. Notice that like I leave my pieces of my lips unconnected. Again, just like the nose, your mouth is not a sticker like slapped on to your face. It's something that comes out from like your skin, so you need to make sure that it feels flush with whatever's around it. And from here, we'll go ahead and do the outline of the head and then the hair. I'm going to go past some stuff pretty quick here with the hair in particular, and not do like a full blown like detailed hair design. But stuff like the skin, like the chin, neck should be pretty easy. I like to start up here where the hairline might begin. We have this nice sort of defined piece for the forehead here, and we'll use that to our advantage. I space these out as far as possible because that should help me get a more smooth look for the piece. Again, we're just ignoring the stubble on this piece. And we'll just come back around. Do pay attention to your line thickness here. And consider like how thick do you want your lines to be. I always try to stay somewhat consistent across my design as to how thick I'm making these lines. Something like ear is definitely more complicated. You're really looking at the shadows to sort of help determine where your lines are going to go. I'm going to start right around here and work my way around to the neckline. Again, go as detailed as possible as you want with this. There's no real wrong amount of detail outside of too little detail. So if you want to spend a long time like working on the ear, you can do that, but those lines right there should be fine for figuring it out. All right, so when it comes to the hair, I generally try to map in the most major shape, so basically the whole hair together, and then I'll go through and try to add in little flourishes for highlights to help sort of define the path and form of the hair. So let's go ahead and do that. You can leave it black, just like I did in here. That looks fine. I think it looks kind of cool. It's definitely like its own style. But if you want more flowing hair, you can do that. If you're doing like blonde hair or light hair, you probably will sort of trace it pretty much like we did the uh, face down here. Just do like an outline of the hair and then leave like the inside white. But doing blank shapes should also be fine. So you notice in here, I'll go back and forth pretty tightly to get this sort of idea of short hair. So I'm using the photo as a guide, but I'm not really using it to help like be super specific with what I'm doing. So that right there sort of helps define the whole hair shape. You can say I did a lot of these shapes that I was really just following the flow of the hair in the design. I was hitting Control Y a lot. That goes to this wireframe mode. That's super handy for just lining things up and drawing pretty clearly as you're going along. So I would definitely use that as needed. And then what I can do is actually go in and add in a few supplementary shapes to help sort of give us a little bit more definition. And I'll do that by zooming in, going to my pen tool, switching to white for my color, and kind of looking for where these dominant shapes are. And I would go through and keep doing more shapes like that. For demo's sake, I'm going to stop there, but you can see how I could really work these through on my design and help define the sort of shape and form of the hair. And I'm really looking for like nice sort of smooth movements here. So I will go through and adjust as needed and make sure I'm seeing those curves happen as I want to. Again, just using that white arrow tool, that direct select tool, to help sort of edge these around so I get the shapes that I'm looking for. So that's how you would do interior shapes. I'm going to go through and just do like the basics of the jacket, and then we'll talk about coloring. So right there we have the basics of the pen tool portrait. Hopefully you can see I was adding in like some little extra lines here and there that could help define the face and help bring a little bit more detail to the piece, which I definitely think you should do and really look for. I really went over this jacket like super quickly. I would definitely spend more time getting all the little details of the jacket to make sure that I'm taking my time with it. But let's go ahead and talk about coloring. And for coloring, what I'm going to do is a few things. One, I'm going to show you the live paint bucket version of how to paint, which should hopefully be the simplest way to do it. I'm going to start by framing this though with a sort of just a black plain border, which will let it be easier for us when we actually go to do the live painting. So I'm going to turn back on my smart grid and just frame this out with a black square. And this is a good opportunity to do any cleanups that you might need. I'm going to go ahead and set this square to have the stroke on the inside and just up it maybe just a little bit so there's actually like a border on it. And I'll go through with my shape builder tool. Remember Shift M on the keyboard, right there on the keyboard, on the toolbar, to get these shapes out of there that we don't actually need. So from here, we're going to go ahead and expand all this stuff and then go to Live Paint Bucket tool. So I'm actually going to select this whole design here. You shouldn't need to necessarily do expand appearance since we didn't do any appearance altering things, but if it's there, go ahead and hit it and then do expand as well. This will just lock in our design. And then while this is all selected, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to the Live Paint Bucket tool, which is K on the keyboard. just click K and you should be able to get to it. I forget exactly where it's under. I think it's underneath here if you were to click and hold on it, but K on the keyboard should bring it up fine. So I'll click this and this will make it a live paint group. What this means is when I'm on that tool and I pick a color, it should let me fill in that shape with that color. So now what I might do is take this template. I don't really need the template there anymore dimmed, so I'll bring it back up to normal so I can get an idea of skin tone here on the piece. And for the eye, we will do a off-white color. We don't want full-on white on the eye. And with that mainly painted in, we'll go ahead and expand this again. So I'm actually going to hit expand. And we're going to ungroup it. And this is really just about taking everything apart. Because when we add shading, we're going to want to like add shading in certain areas and be a little bit more precise about what we're doing. But now you can see I have like shapes that actually follow the outline of the area. So with that in, let's go ahead and sort of clean this up a little bit. So what I'm going to do here is take all my black shapes and cut them out onto their own layer. This will help separate out my color from my shape, which will make things a lot easier when it comes to shading. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select just one black object on that layer, and I'm going to do select same appearance. And I'm just going to cut that all with Control X, make a new layer, and hit Control Shift V to paste it down in place. So that way the line works all on its own layer, and then you have the color all on its own layer. And now what I can do is sort of take this color layer, and we should be able to dim this layer out a little bit, hopefully. Not quite working. Well, the easiest thing we can do. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go to this color layer. So what we're going to do is go to this color layer, and we're going to basically turn the opacity down on it so that we can see our template underneath. So I'm going to select that layer by hitting right next to that little circle. That will select everything on the layer. And I'm just going to go ahead and drag the opacity down to like 50%. Bring back up my photo so that way I can see it underneath. And what we're going to do here is do some shading. You can do the shading on the same layer as the color. That's fine. You can also do it on its own separate layer. That would also work fine as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do it on its own layer because I think that will make my life maybe a little bit easier. Let's make a new layer, and we will go ahead and I'm just going to sort of pull in sort of like what I'm seeing as like the main shadow shapes. So what I'm looking for here when I'm doing shading is the main line of shadow. So let's sort of see where that might be right here on this one. So in here we see a shadow line that kind of goes all the way down to the bottom of the chin. We have a shadow right there. Then we have the shadow of the eye. And the nose. Of a shape like that. And if we get these two shapes in there, as well as some of the supplementary small shapes in here, that will do a lot for sort of bringing out the detail and the form of this piece. So I'll go ahead and do that on the face here. I'm just going to go ahead and grab my pen tool, start tracing out this shape where I see it. And I'm actually going to go ahead and sort of just pull this shape all the way back here. Because if I did this right, what I should be able to do is have that shape selected, and then select my skin tone shape, and then go to my shape builder and hold Alt and delete the part I don't want. And the only thing I didn't really do here was resolve the neck, so I can actually just come down here and just figure out how this will look. This piece will kind of come up, and I'll just kind of do this by adding a second shape into here. And I'll combine those two shapes together. So right now this doesn't really look like anything special or anything all that interesting. So let's go ahead and grab our color layers again and turn their opacity up. Now we can see how that shape really relates to what's going on. I'll start by making it the color of the skin, and I'll go ahead and pick a darker color here so you can see how that shape now interacts with the face. And that's the goal here with shading, is to sort of sculpt around. And I'm not quite digging it here. It is a little hard to tell where that's going to go with some of the more complicated stuff happening with the face and the sort of like facial hair. So I can move the stuff around as needed, though, to hopefully get a little bit of a better look. And I can go ahead and keep doing this. And I know I had the color layer on before, but I can work without it on too, and that should be fine, especially now that I have my color resolved. So I'm going to stop there with this demo. This should give you enough idea of how to go about doing this process. It really is about mastering the pen tool. Take your time with it. I'll post a video with some more in-depth directions on using the pen tool to hopefully help you out. If you've had some pen tool experience before, hopefully it will come back to you on this project. But again, what I'm looking for here is a few things. One, that we are going ahead and we're doing basically pen tool throughout. So you're going to be using the pen tool. You are doing a photo to vector piece. You are doing detail. I would say mine is an adequate minimum amount of detail. If you're going less detailed than this, then I think you need to spend more time on the piece. And then you're doing shading. If you have extra time, do consider a more complex background and consider using gradients. Just to show you on the other piece how I use gradients real quick. Again, it's pretty simple. If I grab one of these skin color pieces here, like this one right here, and I go to my gradient tool, you'll see that I'm just sort of pulling out a gradient on here. The gradient is pretty minor. The color, if we're looking at it, let's go to the gradient window. It's going from a light skin tone to a slightly darker skin tone, so it doesn't need to be that complicated of a gradient, but putting the gradients in there will add a lot of depth to the piece. If I maybe take this piece right here and just paste it down real quick, you can see how if that were to line up, how that would look a little more clearer on there. I can even try it with the skin tones I have going on in this piece, which are a little bit different than the other piece. Let's make sure I'm getting rid of the other gradients. Even just like a linear gradient like this can add a little depth on that side. I would probably stick with radial for the most part, just because like the skull, the face are a little bit more rounded in tone. So radial is probably the way to go. But even that right there helps add in a little depth to the piece that was not there before. And I think the subtlety of doing the gradient effect is part of its strength. You don't want to go overboard with it, but it definitely can look pretty cool. Again, on this one, you can say I added some supplementary stuff. some smoke on the cigarette there. I went through shading on the shirt as well. I did the pattern on this pillow under his arm. I had some other stuff in here as well. But this is a pretty complex piece here that if you get about this, that's great. That's awesome. That means you really explored it. If it's a little bit less complicated, that's fine. But take your time with this one. Find a photo that you like. Make sure it's a detailed photo. I can't stress this enough. If you have a bad photo, you're going to have a bad piece. This photo right here is pretty huge. It was like 3,000 by 3,000 pixels, so it's on the large size. Don't use small photos. Secondly, use photos that have clear shadow and light. The whole reason I can do shadow on this piece is because I could really outline from the photo where the shadow parts of the face were. If you have a really like flushed out face that's washed out, which you might see in some like fashion photography or more commercial photography, um, they don't necessarily make for good art photos. So do keep that in mind as well as you're working. So with that, we'll be working on this for the next 2 weeks. So have this week to sort of figure out your design, figure out what photo you're going to use, maybe practice with the pen tool a little bit, get down the line work, and then probably next week think about what details you can add and think about how you can push the design even further. Because I could definitely spend way more time on this piece here. And this is just me doing a demo. If I were doing a complete piece, I'd really go all out on the hair. I'd go all out on the shading, on the clothing, and really make it as complex as possible.